Opera last night. That was quite an event. I've been told some of the performances are really some of the best classics, which really provided an opportunity for the U.S. president, to get a glimpse of the Oriental culture here. So let me now bring in our guests this morning, Mr. Deedee from China's University of International Relations, and also Professor Rick Dunham with Xinhua University. Rick used to work as a White House correspondent. Thank you very much for joining us. So it is the third face-to-face meeting between the two presidents. The two leaders do seem to get along. It seems like, at least from the optic of it, that they enjoy some kind of affinity, and some also say they have a personal relationship being built, which is quite extraordinary given what U.S. President has said before about China's effort in curbing nuclear program in the DPRK and the trade problem it has with China. Does it, come as a surprise to you, Mr.
Well, Donald Trump is all about personal relationships. When you think about him, you have to think of him as a businessman, and it's all about trusting the person you're dealing with. And yes, there was a lot of negative rhetoric, harsh rhetoric during the campaign about China. But after the election, he's had at least 8 conversations on the phone with President Xi Jinping. The meetings in Mar-a-Lago were very, very smooth. Personally, they get along. For Donald Trump, that is the most important thing in a relationship. All policy flows from that. Can he trust? Does he like the person he's dealing with?
And so right now they're clearly trying to build a lot of trust among these two leaders. So Mr. Dahl, let me ask you, we're calling this a state visit plus, but help us understand, what are the standard arrangements for a visiting president like Donald Trump?
I think this morning we are going to see the so-called standard part of the state visit, like reviewing the Guard of the Honor, like 21 gun salute, and also like play the national anthem. But I think the plus, my understanding is the plus part was yesterday evening, last evening in the Forbidden City. I think the cultural tour, having tea together and tour the Forbidden City. I think this is something very special. As you said, this is something I think happened for the first time.
Because these events are designed to maximize one-on-one time between President Xi and President Trump, correct?
Exactly, and particularly, that was the first event happened during this visit. I mean, President Trump went to the Forbidden City directly from the airport, right? So this is the first event. They spend time together and show him the history, the civilization. If we look back to their summit this April in Mar-a-Lago, I think at that time they talked a lot about history. The history on Korean Peninsula, China and the Korean Peninsula. I think President Trump was very interested in the history part. So this time again, because this is his first visit to China, I think this is extremely important for him to give him the first impression. That is a cultural impression. That's the impression of history. I think that will lay a very solid foundation for today's formal discussion and also the ceremonies.
Yeah, and this is also the first time I think I've ever heard a phrase like state visit plus been ever used. And as the official puts it, they hope this would provide an opportunity for the U.S. president to see the Chinese people, Chinese culture and history through his own eyes. But what kind of image does China want to portray to the U.S. president? What message does China want the U.S. president to take in after engaging these kind of events, Mr. Dunham?
Well, I say strength is number 1, consistency is number 2. Secondly, the history. I think it's very important to underscore to President Trump the history of China, the long history of China, and how China is entering, according to President Xi Jinping, the new era. And so to take 5,000 years and then to move it to the next one, and talking about doing it together. And that is, I think that's the message that he wants. He wants to work with the United States. He wants the United States to be a partner rather than either an enemy or a competitor.
Yeah.
Doctor, go ahead.
How do you define the two's relationship at this stage after all this? Because this relationship, this personal relationship, could set the tone for the future bilateral relationship between U.S. and China for the next few years.
Well, it is the base of the relationship, but you have to say that there are difficult economic issues. President Trump, even in the last few days, as he's been in Japan and South Korea, has been talking about trade. He's been critical of China on trade. So I think what you will see out of the government of China are some openings, particularly contracts and partnerships with American businesses. But I think that having that relationship of trust is the first step toward dealing with difficult issues. North Korea, the Korean Peninsula, is a very difficult issue with no easy answers. But the fact that they trust each other means that they can negotiate or try to come up with a strategy and then bring in Russia and then talk about Japan and South Korea and how you move forward on these very difficult issues.
Well, we're going to check in with you throughout the day, but this is live coverage on CGTN of President Xi welcoming Donald Trump to Beijing. It's a big day for both countries. We also want to jump over to our colleague, Mike Walter, who's standing by in Washington, D.C., with more on this big visit. Mike.
CGTN puts you in the front seat as the leaders of the world's most powerful economies meet. Following President Xi's latest U.S. visit, Donald Trump makes his first presidential trip to China. On the table, business deals, regional security, and how to strengthen global governance. Our team of international reporters and analysts will bring you all sides of the story. Stick with CGTN and see the difference.
Well, welcome back to CGTN's special coverage of Trump's state visit to China. We're expecting a series of high-level meetings, as we mentioned, later today.
That's right, and President Xi is scheduled to hold talks with Mr. Donald Trump on topics of regional and international importance. And let's go over stateside now to my colleague Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. to see what the U.S. is hoping to achieve from Trump's first official visit to China. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Lee Chiu-wen. It's been billed as a state visit plus, and the pomp and ceremony surrounding Donald Trump's arrival in Beijing made headlines here in the United States and around the world. Headline in the Chicago Tribune: Trump receives lavish welcoming in China at start of two-day visit. The paper also highlighted the personal exchanges between Trump and President Xi during a tour of the Forbidden City, noting that the two leaders watched a Chinese children's opera and the pair shared a traditional tea and salutations of friendship. And as the two leaders got to more serious matters, USA Today highlighted the business deals reached with the headline, Trump in Asia. U.S. and China companies inked $9 billion in deals. A total of 19 agreements signed there in a ceremony in Beijing. Will those deals be the start of stronger business and trade ties between the world's two largest economies? It's an important question. CGTN's Nathan King is joining us now with more on that part of the China-U.S. relationship. Nathan?
Yeah, we haven't had the official announcement on these trade deals yet, but the Americans have leaked to the American press. And what's quite incredible about them is a vast range of deals. Okay, it's $9 billion, but across a whole array of industries, from aerospace to energy to technology, and will actually create jobs here in the United States. So that's definitely a take-home for U.S. Trump deliverable. But I think, everyone's looking at the broader relationship, aren't they? What are they going to do when it comes to sticking point? And since coming into office, U.S. President Trump and Xi Jinping have been trying to work on that relationship. Let's take a look.
At their Mar-a-Lago summit back in April, Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump fast-tracked economic negotiations. First, a 100-day plan of action, which, among other things, allowed US beef to be imported into China after a 14-year absence, and Chinese cooked chicken products to be imported into the US for the first time. And then Chinese and US officials back in July, at their first comprehensive and economic dialogue, reported progress on specifics. But when it comes to the wider trade and economic relationship, the U.S. is asking for more.
This is only possible if there is a more fair and balanced economic relationship between the United States and China. This means providing access for American firms in China as we provide access for Chinese firms in the United States. It means addressing the imbalances caused by the Chinese intervention in its economy, as well as addressing the impact of industrial, agricultural, technological, and cyber policies.
The pace may not be what the US wants, but China continues to open up. Since that dialogue in July, European airspace giant Airbus has officially opened a major facility in China, and European investors have been investing in China's Rust Belt.
In general, the attitude to foreign companies here, reported by our members, is pretty good. Yeah. So the government, as said already, they spare no efforts in order to make it easier for foreign companies to come here to promote their place.
At the 19th Party Congress, Xi recommitted China to further reform and opening up. And on this state visit to China, US President Donald Trump will be pressing his Chinese hosts on that commitment. US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is on the trip, accompanied by many US business executives eager to work with China on everything from cars to climate. The comprehensive and economic dialogue paved the way for potential agreements in areas ranging from natural gas to more US access to financial services in China. In return, Beijing would like fewer restrictions on US high-tech exports to China, including dual-use technologies with civilian and military applications.
You know, these issues aren't new. Of course, before the Trump administration, China and the US have been working on a bilateral investment treaty, also differences and agreement on other areas of trade. But, you know, with the relationship being so wide and deep and worth hundreds of billions of dollars, there's always one industry lobbying against this or that. So there's a lot to get through. But I think these deals, even though people might laugh at them and say $9 billion, it's not huge when you talk about the overall trade relationship, do create trust and do create more jobs in each other's markets, which of course creates elan and momentum.
Yeah, that energy. All right, Nathan, thanks so much. Joining us live from Mountain View, California is Rebecca Fannin. She's founder and editor of Silicon Dragon. It covers news and research on the world's top tech innovation centers. Nathan hitting on a lot of these key themes, but one of the things you hear a lot here in the United States, and I also heard it from some European business executives when I was in Beijing, is market access. They feel like the doors is shut or maybe just a little bit ajar. You're also hearing at events here in the United States, I was at the China Chamber of Commerce last year, you hear the same thing about U.S. market access for Chinese firms. So how do you expand market access on both sides? How big an issue is that?
Well, there is a lot of friction on both sides, and both sides actually need one another. We need Chinese products, they need U.S. products. So it seems like there could be a win-win if we could figure it out.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You've profiled Jack Ma of Alibaba and Robin Li of Baidu. And I was in Hangzhou last year at the G20, and you're seeing, like, basically the Silicon Valley emerging there in China. And then you hear about Mark Zuckerberg and his efforts to try and get into China and how difficult that's been for him. Talk to me about that imbalance as well.
Yeah, it certainly is true in the technology innovation field that U.S. companies have had a hard time getting into the Chinese market. Some are restricted. Some have just not been able to break through because they haven't been able to get the right formula. But at the same time, we're seeing Chinese companies entering the U.S. market. For instance, today there was a deal by Tencent to buy into Snap. So these trends continue, and I think we're going to see much more of these kinds of deals happening both ways. And I do think that we will see greater access by U.S. companies to get into the Chinese market. After all, it is the biggest market in the world. They do need to get in there. They need to figure out how to get in there correctly, and I think things will start to loosen up.
Rebecca, realistically, though, what type of expectations should we have? What kind of takeaways do you think will come as a result of this two-day visit by Donald Trump to China?
Well, it certainly seems to be positive so far. There's a lot of grandstanding. I think that there'll be a rub-off effect for people to the way that they regard China. I think it's kind of a door opener, actually.
And so your thoughts, though, as you watch these deals that we saw today, $9 billion inked, and as Nathan was saying, you know, really in the overall scheme of things, that may not seem like a lot, but does that really kind of get the energy going and perhaps maybe open things up a little bit more in terms of trade between these two countries?
Well, I think so. It's, for instance, when Jack Ma came to New York to visit Trump and, talked about creating lots of American jobs. Really, those jobs are through companies that use the Alibaba service. So I do think we're going to see those kinds of deals opening up. and we'll see small businesses getting into China and the larger tech companies getting in as well. Airbnb is there, a number of other, Amazon is there, a number of other, eBay has been there. They've all had their different experiences. Facebook has had a lot of challenges in China. Google has as well. I think we'll continue to see some of those challenges around, how do you get around the censorship issue? How do you deal with that? It's a really difficult challenge.
No, it's interesting stuff. Thanks so much for your analysis, Rebecca Fannin, joining us from Mountain View, California. And let's send it back to Beijing, where Li Chiyuan continues our coverage of President Trump's state visit to China.
That's right. Thank you so much, Mike. Now, for more about the welcoming ceremony for President Trump, let's speak to our reporter, Yiting, who is live in front of the Great Hall of the People for us. Good morning, Yiting. So tell us first about the mood around you. Set the scene for us.
Well, Chu-Yuan, you know that I'm now standing at the east gate of the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, and you can sense the atmosphere around me. It's warm and friendly atmosphere, and you know that the welcoming ceremony will be soon start in just a couple of minutes, and everyone here is ready for the welcoming ceremony, and President Xi Jinping will give U.S. President Donald Trump the highest standard of the the welcoming, that is the State Visit Plus experience in reciprocity to the hospitality he received from Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago in April this year. And you know that President Xi Jinping will just, together with the U.S. President Donald Trump, stand upon that podium, and they will also inspect the Guard of Honor from the armed forces of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and they will also listen to the national anthems played by the military band. And as you can see that the journalists, both from home and abroad, they are here very early in the morning. They brave the morning chill to just get a good position to shoot the film and to just to get the good pictures from this grand welcoming ceremony. And you know that the one of the highlights today for the welcoming ceremony is that there will be 10 American students who will be together with the Chinese students here to welcome the both leaders from China and the United States. And we're now very happy to join with these very lovely boys and girls. So could you please tell us what your expectation about the grand ceremony that will be held between President Xi and U.S. President Donald Trump? Very excited, right?
Yeah.
And you?
Me too. I'm also really excited.
Very excited. This is your first time here at the Great Hall of the People, right?
Yes.
So you're feeling today?
I'm very, very excited too.
And you as well,
Very
right?
excited.
Okay. All these students, are very excited to be here to say welcome to both presidents. And we know that you have already learned lots of things here in China. So could you please show us what have you learned? I know, Nathan, you are good at martial art. Could you please show our global audiences about what you love to China most?
I love China's Kung Fu.
Kung Fu. So please show us. Wow, great. Fantastic. Wow. Wow, that's great. Wow, hooray, hooray. Well, we give the very big applause to these students from American, and later they will just hold the national flags and also the flowers in their hands to welcome the presidents from China and the United States. Jiuyuan.
So excited is the word for the day, and we can see the honorary guards already in place. Everything is all set, ready to go. Tell us more about what can we expect on today's schedule. What is the significance of this meeting between the leaders of the two biggest economies in the world?
Yes, Chu-Yuan, and I also want to tell you that the military band has been ready here, and they will also play the national anthem. And one additional song that it will play is the Stars and Stripes Forever. That's the national march of the United States of America. And later, they will hold large group meetings and small group meetings very soon. And you know that President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump will discuss the trade cooperation, and also the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue will also be on the negotiation table. And China has advocated lots of times that the denuclearize of the Korean Peninsula is the major issue, and you know that the right way to solve that issue is the suspension for suspension initiative and also the dual track approach. So we are very looking forward to the talks between between the two presidents. And you know that one of the highlights is that Donald Trump is also accompanied by a very large business delegation, and they will also witness the signing ceremony of some of the MOUs and also the contracts between the two sides. So we're very looking forward to that. The trade and economic cooperation will be mutually beneficial. Back to you, Qiuyuan.
Thanks a lot, Yuting. We'll be watching the ceremony closely together with you. Appreciate your report there. Now, let me bring back our guests, Mr. Da Wei and also Professor Rick Dunham. Welcome again. Now, let me start with Mr. Da Wei this time again. You know, the White House aide sees Trump's visit to China really as the centerpiece of this lengthy Asian tour. I mean, that's the 12-day tour, probably the longest tour he's ever had in Asia. And today, we're going to see some real actions, you know, behind all the pageantry, the photo ops. This is when we get down to real business. So what do you expect to happen today?
I think basically there are two topics that everybody I think are interested in. One is the trade, the other is the DPRK nuclear issue. So I don't know I don't know what will happen exactly, but I think everybody, if you surf on the social media, so people are talking about, you know, the deals, the big deals on the trade side, on the economic side. We don't know which we can sign. The two, you know, business community, what kind of deal will they reach? Okay, and also in the maybe press conference, what the two state leader will speak on the bilateral relations and also on the, you know, difficult issue like DPRK. Will they reach some kind of consensus during their press conferences? I think these are the two things that I will watch very closely.
So Professor Dunham, as we watch these live pictures coming out of the Great Hall of the People here, as we await for President Trump to arrive there to be welcomed by President Xi, we talk about these business deals being signed, but are we expecting any major policy change when it comes to China?
The answer is no, and I don't think either president wants that. There always are what are called deliverables. I covered President Clinton coming to China in 1998. Before the trip, they knew what they were going to sign. The idea is you lower expectations so that the press and the public in your country does not expect huge things. You deliver at least what you promised, and maybe there will be something that the negotiators behind the scenes are working on, and they have a breakthrough, and then it's better than expected. So I think that's what we have. We have the agreements, as your correspondent said, they've been leaked to the American press, so we basically know what there is, but maybe there will be a surprise, and then that will be seen as great progress.
But what could that surprise possibly be at this point?
Well, it would be either say something with financial services or market access for Chinese firms in the United States. It would have to be something that has been negotiated since the Obama administration, that has been moving forward but isn't ready for announcement, and they reached the next level over this week. I mean, they really do want to have agreements, but they also don't want to make it look like there's any failure at all. So they only leak what they know they're going to do, and then they hope that maybe there's an extra bonus that makes everybody look good and makes the president's very happy.
But does the U.S. has a clear China policy as of now? What's the essence of it?
That's a tough question, because for two reasons. One is the State Department has so many unfilled positions that there is not really a strong East Asia policy or China policy. And then the other is you have what Donald Trump said during the campaign versus what he's done as president. And what he's done as president has both been continuity of the Obama policy, but also much more friendly on a personal level with a leader of China. And so we don't know the policy because we don't know if he is going to go back to the protectionism of the campaign. I think we can only judge by what he has actually said since he has become president, which is very favorable, probably is the most positive talk about China, at least since the Clinton administration.
And so what do you think, Mr. Dahl, what do you think is in it for China? What is China hoping to walk away from these meetings with?
I think, first of all, fundamentally, China wants a successful visit. This is the most important thing, because we know this is the first foreign state leader visit China after the 19th Party Congress. And also, this is the 1 year anniversary of Mr. Trump's victory, right, in the election. So this is a very critical moment. So it have a very strong symbolic role, in this visit, I think. So the visit, I hope that this visit can lay like a keynote visit, to lay the foundation for the future. I don't know how many years Trump will in the White House. At least 3 years, right? For the development.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt now, but you're now watching the live picture of the motorcades of the presidents driving down the Chang'an Avenue. That's the biggest thoroughfare in Beijing, in front of the Tiananmen Square. That's the Forbidden City you are watching right there. Both presidents had a tour in the Forbidden City last afternoon, I should say.
Yeah, these are stunning pictures here. All these sites are very well known all over the world. It's interesting seeing this street, which is usually clogged with traffic. It's right next to Tiananmen Square, which is a huge tourist attraction filled with thousands of people. It's interesting watching this now all cleared out for this very grand ceremony where President Xi will welcome President Trump to the great Hall of the People there, which is the seat of power for Chinese government. As our guest just mentioned, it was just last month that President Xi delivered his very long, grand speech to the Communist Party, the People's Congress there, and is now emerging here to meet President Trump.
All right.
On the front steps.
Yeah, you're now watching the President of People's Republic of China, President Xi Jinping, alongside with First Lady, Madam Peng Liyuan, stepping out, just emerged from the building of the Great Hall of the People. They're stepping down the red carpet. They're there to welcome the United States President Donald Trump. This is a state welcome ceremony. Protocol is very important in the Chinese governance and diplomacy if you're familiar with Chinese culture, and such events are usually carefully choreographed down to the smallest detail. And China obviously want to send out a message that U.S. President Donald Trump is well respected here. And whether that will play out, into China's advantage, whether that will accomplish on a diplomatic view standpoint, remains to be seen, though.
Yeah. Soon after President Trump's inauguration. Apparently that trip made a very big impact on President Xi. And these are the pictures here. President Trump leaving the limousine to shake hands and greet the Chinese president and his wife.
Yeah, let's listen in for a moment.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, 外交部长 Foreign Minister, 国家发改委主任 Minister of National Development and Reform Commission, 财政部长 Minister of Finance.
So as we're watching here, President Trump being introduced to all the different ministers here in China on the red carpet. As we keep on saying, China has rolled out the red carpet, literally and figuratively, to welcome him and his wife.
Yeah, and President Trump is being given this ceremonial reception in front of the Great Hall of the People. He was being introduced to the senior officials, including Foreign Minister and the Minister of Reform and Development Commission, and all the other big names in the political sector and also the business sector as well.
Thank you.
And this is
And that right there is the ambassador, right there, the American ambassador who just shook his hand to China, Edward Branstad.
Now Rex Tillerson up there. So now as the U.S. officials being introduced to President Xi.
To the President, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. Assistant to the President, National Security Advisor.
We're expecting this ceremony to take about 20 minutes or so.
Assistant to the President, Senior Advisor for Policy. Assistant to the President, Chief of Staff to the First Lady. Assistant to the President, Director of Communications. Assistant to the President, Staff Secretary. Assistant to the President, Director of Social Media. Director of Advisor. Assistant to the President, Press Secretary. And General Kelly.
So if you're just joining us, you're watching live pictures of the welcoming ceremony in front of the Great Hall of the People. This is an important day, obviously, where the world will be watching how the bilateral ties between China and the U.S. would move forward from here, arguably the most important bilateral relationships in the world, and whether some solutions can be found to some of the most pressing security issues in the region.
Yeah, this is President Trump's third stop on his 12-day, five-nation Asian summit.
All right, let's listen in.
总统阁下，中国人民解放军仪仗队列队完毕，请您检阅。
now watching President Xi Jinping together with US President Donald Trump walking along the red carpet to inspect military guard here. And the welcome ceremony in President Donald Trump's name is being held as we speak outside the Great Hall of the People. The military band had played the national anthem of the People's Republic of China and the United States, and President Trump is now inspecting the honor of guard with his Chinese counterpart now.
Yeah, China's pulling out all the stops for this visit. They've called it a state visit plus. They are putting on a full show. We know how how President Trump definitely likes the attention, and without question, this is designed to show China's respect to President Trump and to try to forge a very long-lasting, positive relationship.
Yeah, and this is their third face-to-face meeting. The first one was at Mar-a-Lago in the United States.
And this song right here is actually specially chosen too. This is the Stars and Stripes Forever, which is a John Philip Sousa march penned back in 1896. The fact that the Chinese government is having this song played with American children waving American and Chinese flags outside is of special significance right there.
And today's meeting is really after, last afternoon's meeting in a more relaxed setting. They were speaking to each other in a more relaxed setting, which kind of...
they had tea, they watched an opera.
Yeah, and smoothed the relationship a little bit.
And now clearly they're trying to set the mood of excitement, of energy, of positive feelings here.
That's right.
It's interesting to watch all this unfold here for the American president, of course the Chinese president too, especially considering that President Trump is not enjoying incredible popularity ratings back at home. But here, President Xi is without question rolling out that red carpet as they walk down here with the children singing and dancing there, greeting the two leaders.
Yeah, they are waving these miniature flags, United States flag and Chinese flag, jumping up and down.
We saw one of the children earlier, which I thought was hilarious. The kid that did the kung fu moves there.
Really got the move there.
In a suit to boot. And so, pretty impressive. And now, obviously President Trump enjoying all this, greeting the children, saying hello. Yeah, it's a big ceremony, a big moment for both leaders here.
Yeah, quite an elaborate official ceremony right there
And after this will be serious business. The two leaders are going to go inside the Great Hall of the People where they have some thorny issues to discuss. It's not just the DPRK issue, but also trade, the economy. There's a lot on the agenda, so they will meet behind closed doors and spend more time together, and then emerge later on this afternoon for a series of events and high-profile meetings.
Yeah, some of the issues, most pressing issues, as our guest mentioned a little earlier, would be the DPRK's nuclear program and the trade issues between the two countries. It'll be interesting to watch how U.S. President Donald Trump is going to change and adjust to a different audience now for the Chinese. He was just traveling from South Korea, giving this really big speech on the DPRK problem in front of National Assembly there in Seoul, and now he is in China. So how he will adjust that tone to his Chinese counterpart, that'll be interesting to watch.
We've seen a lot of changes in President Trump's tones over the months. We saw during the campaign he was very harsh and very critical of China. Once he got inaugurated, that tone has changed considerably. He describes President Xi as a good friend. He says they have a warm relationship, although they disagree on several big issues. DPRK is just one of them. And so we'll see what kind of impact this meeting has between the two leaders over the months and weeks ahead as they try to tackle some of these these thornier issues.
Yeah, let me just bring our guests back in. Mr. Donnan, Mr. Trump actually spoke highly about Chinese president, giving personal praises. I'm sorry, I have to pause for a little bit to let our viewers to
kind of
take in all the image.
Yeah.
just going back to the question before, Mr. Dunham, I was saying Mr. Trump has been given these high personal praises to Mr. Xi. I'm quoting his words. He says, Mr. Xi is a powerful man. I happen to think he's a very good person, but he also says this won't stop him from getting tough with China on certain issues. What is he prepared to do, and how he's planning to do them?
Well, I think having said that he likes him and he trusts him, it makes it possible for him to criticize the policies of China without making it personal. I mean, I know that's one thing. If you go back to Hillary Clinton had some problems with the Chinese government and Chinese people because of the tone, and so her criticisms became personal. I think this is the way you negotiate. You say, I trust you, but we disagree on this. And I think that trade is thorny, but I'm interested in what happens on some foreign policy issues like in Pakistan and India or the South China Sea, because that's where personal relationships become very important, where there's not a deliverable in the same way. But I do think that behind closed doors, they will talk about what they want. The reality is hard bargaining and seeing if there is any common ground where they can move forward.
There's a lot to consider there. Let's take a moment here to listen to some of the music and pageantry put on display for the two presidents. So again, these are live pictures coming from the Great Hall of the People of President Xi and President Trump right there, walking side by side along the red carpet up to the steps here for this very, very special welcome to President Trump to China.
That is right, and they are heading back to the Great Hall of the People where they're expected to have closed-door meetings. I've been told they're going to have 2 sessions of closed-door meetings, and they're about to deliver remarks after the first session, and when that happens, we'll obviously bring that to you live as well.
And just to give you guys at home some perspective here, this is a very formal welcome ceremony that China considers its highest regard for a visiting head of state. This is not necessarily normal. This is not what a foreign leader or a foreign president might necessarily get. China really is putting on a show to make sure that President Trump feels welcome and to build a good relationship between the two leaders.
That's right. As you said, the highest level for a state leader's welcoming ceremony for the 21 gun salute that's been given to President Trump. That is the highest level of military honor in this kind of setting, reserved only for heads of state. He inspected the military guard. You know, he was welcomed by Chinese American school children waving Chinese and U.S. flags. It was really
this trip has been
and
this trip has been peppered with all sorts of unprecedented events. The fact that the American president Donald Trump had dinner inside the Forbidden City yesterday with President Xi, and also a very rare special moment that is not usually enjoyed with a visiting head of state.
All right, that was another photo op for the first couples, and that's a wrap for the brief welcoming ceremony there.
Brief, but with a lot of punch, without question.
It is, and it was a well-planned, well-choreographed one. You see all the ceremonies, receptions there. Let us bring our guests back. What do you make of the ceremony? What impressed you the most?
Well, I saw a different Donald Trump. It reminds me of when I first met him. There is a Donald Trump that is sort of formal in public, that he's not the swaggering, bombastic person, but like when he was growing up, he was told to behave. He's a very polite person. But from a reporter's standpoint, I always look at it from the American political perspective. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, was there, one of the people to meet President Xi Jinping. Also, the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was there, where when President Trump met the Pope, he did not invite his then press secretary, Sean Spicer. And so that was sort of significant if you're talking about criminology of the American presidency. And his chief of staff was the last person he introduced. So the other is when Donald Trump was meeting the Chinese delegation, it looked like most of the people he didn't know, he didn't recognize. But the foreign minister, he definitely did. The state counselor, these are people that he does know and has a relationship with. So that was interesting to watch.
Well, and you mentioned Jared Kushner. It's also notable that Jared Kushner is leaving this big tour after the trip to China, that he made a point to stay here and to be here for the Beijing tour, this trip.
Right. It's important for the relationship. I mean, he is not only family, but he's involved in some of the most important issues. And I think one of the things they will discuss privately has to do with the Middle East. And Jared Kushner has been meeting with the Saudi leaders. He was there before the crackdown.
Visit happened at a very interesting moment. So we want to, through showing this respect, pay the respect, sending the signal that this is a very important visit, and we want a fresh start for next 3 years, for next maybe 10 years, for midterm and long-term bilateral relations. So during the ceremony, I think, except for the standard part, I think there are many very good things, like those kids. I love those kids, you know, those Chinese and Americans. I think that add human elements in the very formal ceremony, welcome ceremony. I think this is great.
And family is so critical, I think, to both President Xi and President Trump. It's interesting seeing the children there and the grandchildren involved in some kind of way.
And also, one thing I think we didn't mention, that this is a state visit, but usually when the United States president pay a state visit, it's a relatively long visit. Usually the U.S. president will visit cities outside Beijing, like Shanghai or Xi'an. But this time, this is a very short visit because of the the long trip. Because the president has to visit 5 countries at one time. So for his schedule, only less than, I think, 48 hours in China. But China still want to make it as a state visit. So this is, I think, this shows China's respect to the president.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, President Trump is only going to be in China for today. He leaves tomorrow. This is the beginning of a very long day, but this is a 12-day Asian tour. It's the longest Asian tour any American president has taken since the early 90s. But we also want to talk about President Trump's policy towards China. It seems to have changed from his campaign rhetoric. So our reporter Jessica Stone looks at what's new with this administration's approach towards Beijing.
Throughout his U.S. presidential campaign, Donald Trump pitted the Chinese worker against the American voter.
They're all taking our jobs, folks. That's all going to change very rapidly, I promise.
Arguing he was the only candidate who could masterfully deal with Beijing.
I deal with the Chinese all of the time.
But at his Mar-a-Lago estate,
We have developed a friendship, I can see that.
Trump emphasized the importance of U.S.-China cooperation, especially when it comes to Pyongyang. Just hours after this failed DPRK missile test, Trump reversed a campaign pledge. He declined to label Beijing a currency manipulator. He didn't slap higher tariffs on Chinese imports, and he didn't take any more calls from Taiwan's leader after their first exchange.
He has, in that process, had a 180-degree U-turn in a policy taught China is not he changed his policy or changed U.S. policy, just changed his personal style of dealing with those issues.
Trump has continued to press on trade. Ahead of his state visit to China, a senior White House official predicted Trump will demand a reduction in the $347 billion U.S. trade deficit with China. But if Trump pushes for concessions, at least one of China's neighbors hopes he doesn't press too hard.
I express my hope that the U.S. will be able to maintain a stable and constructive relationship with China, engaging each other at the highest levels, building trust, establishing institutional mechanisms.
And during last month's 19th National Congress of the CPC, China reiterated its hope of building a community with a shared future for all mankind. And President Xi said China was doing all it could to realize this ambitious goal.
中国积极发展全球伙伴关系，扩大同各国的利益交汇点。
China has actively developed global partnerships and expanded the convergence of interest with other countries. China will promote coordination and cooperation with other major countries and work to build a framework for major country relations, featuring overall stability and balanced development.
中国秉持共商共建共享的全球治理观。
China follows the principle of achieving shared growth through discussion and collaboration in engaging in global governance. China stands for democracy in international relations and the equality of all countries, big or small, strong or weak, rich or poor.
And since President Xi took office in 2012, the Chinese government has implemented a slew of measures to strengthen its relations with the United States. Let's now run through some of them.
The concept of a new model of major country relationship was brought up by Chinese President Xi Jinping in the summer of 2013 during his visit to the U.S.
应从两国人民的利益出发。
Both sides should proceed from the fundamental interests of our people and bear in mind human development and progress. We need to think creatively and act energetically so that working together we can build a new model of major country relationship.
China's rise brought up concern on the so-called Thucydides trap, an old Greek metaphor referring to a tendency of war when a rising power rivals a ruling power. During a state visit to the U.S. almost 2 years ago, President Xi went on record saying there will be no such thing as Thucydides trap between China and the U.S., as long as both parties understand and trust each other to avoid strategic misjudgment.
我这次访问美国。
I come to the United States this time to promote peace and advanced cooperation.
Fast forward to this year. During his trip to the U.S. in April, the Chinese president said, there are 1,000 reasons for the two nations to work together, noting that China will keep on pushing forward with peaceful development and is willing to join hands with the U.S. to maintain world peace, stability, and prosperity. Now, with Trump's America First policy and China's new era, what will happen next remains to be seen.
That's right. What will happen next?
Remains to be seen.
Yeah, we're going to have to find out today. Mr. Dunham, because Mr. Trump does not have the usual diplomatic demeanor, what he says can be, some say, can be impulsive. What are you hoping him to say during this meeting, and what are you hoping that he would not say, would not mention?
Well, I think his advisors are hoping that he sticks to the message like he did in Korea. I mean, that was a real test, because you didn't know if he was going to talk about Little Rocket Man, but he was as diplomatic as can be. He was strong in his language, but disciplined. I think that's what they hope. They hope if he's tweeting, it's about American politics or about how much he appreciates his hosts and not starting to go off on policy. I think it's a question of discipline, and it's a long trip, and I think for President Trump, it's a key to maintain a pace, and I think that that would be the goal. What they don't want is something that's off script. They don't want something impulsive. But he has shown on this whole trip that he can be disciplined when it comes to the one-on-one relationships. Even though when he goes on social media, he's Donald Trump. That's the other Donald Trump.
And so, Mr. Daw, do you feel like, with that in mind, that President Trump and President Xi are growing closer together? Do you feel like the relationship is truly improving here?
Of course, I don't think we should exaggerate the role of the personal relation too much. It's not the whole story of the bilateral relations, of course. But I think, yes, the relationship between the two leaders is extremely important, particularly for the China-U.S. relations, because this is a very complicated, relationship. There are many divergences, many different beliefs, values here. So if we don't have we need a kind of top-down approach to manage the whole bilateral relations. So if we lack this kind of top-down, then the bilateral relations will drift. It will be drawn by some negative news. We have a lot of negative stories in this bilateral relations. So we should not let those negative stories to ruin the whole bilateral relations. So then the top-down management is extremely important. Well, to have the top-down management, I think the personal relationship between the two leaders are extremely important. And I think it's very unusual that these two presidents, I mean Chinese president and the U.S. president, has this very close, real chemistry between them. Because you live in China, you know that the Chinese culture is different from the West, and the people's personality are very different. So sometimes it's quite difficult for the U.S. president and the Chinese president, or two leaders, to make friends. In their touch the bottom of their heart. But I feel that President Xi and President Trump they have already developed this kind of personal relationship. I think this is something very unusual and very, very helpful.
Clearly, they're trying to get them to bond further, which is why we've seen so many one-on-one events scheduled between the two leaders.
Yeah, the understanding of each other's culture, the history is so important when you have that much at stake. That's right. So now discussions around the Korean Peninsula issue is expected to weigh heavily during Trump's visit to China. The cooperation between Beijing and Washington is crucial in peacefully resolving the issue and restoring peace. So we'll talk about that in a while. Stay with us.
I think we need to do even more, and it's going to take the leadership of the United States and China working together and leading the other countries in the world to prevent the threat.
This is our best chance to resolve this problem short of war.
And you are watching a special coverage of U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to Beijing, the first state visit. And among the many important topics to be discussed Thursday, security is definitely one of the most important issues which draws most public attentions, which tension is running high on the Korean Peninsula, and the world is watching how two of the world's major powers will deal with it.
Yeah, without question, the DPRK nuclear issue is going to be one of the dominant talking points from Trump's visits to Japan, South Korea, and it's sure to be once again here in China when he meets with President Xi.
That's right. And on Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said Beijing's stance on the issue hasn't changed. And spokesperson Hua Ching said all parties should try to resolve the problem peacefully. And for more on this, we can go live to our reporter Cui Huiao in Dandong, a city in China's northeast Liaoning province, right on the DPRK border. Good to see you there, Huiao. So let's now talk more about this. China and the United States have jointly proposed a UN resolution blacklisting an additional 15 DPRK entities and individuals following Pyongyang's repeated missile launches. How has China's implementation of the UN resolution with sanctions against the DPRK impacted things there at the China and DPRK border?
Right, Toyuan, the effects of Chinese sanctions against the neighboring DPRK have certainly trickled down to companies and individuals here based in Dandong, where the bulk of cross-border trade takes place. I'm actually standing in front of the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge, where sees almost 80% of the trade flowing through, but those days of trucks loaded with seafood, coal, iron, and iron ore rushing between the two sides appear to be gone. And I've also been visiting multiple places in the city, and it is such a difficult time right now, especially for those who are engaged in the trade business with the DPRK.
For people who live in the border city Dandong, it's hard not to feel the economic squeeze ever since China announced to comply with UN sanctions against the DPRK.
Because they can't pay us in cash, we're taking losses.
I heard companies that export oil products to the DPRK are now being restricted. Businesses have gone down.
It's not just a large-scale trade of weapons-grade material that is banned entirely. For exporters of home appliances like water heaters or flooring tiles, business is also in a slump, even if those products are not on the blacklist. Requests for interviews were turned down by nearly all business owners on a street famous for selling hardware. People simply do not want to talk about trade during difficult times. One place to observe the dwindling trade in Dandong is on the Sino-Korean Friendship Bridge, which sees almost 80% of bilateral trade flowing through.
Those days of trucks full of seafood, coal, iron, and iron ore crossing from the DPRK to China appear to be over for now. It's evident that China is honoring its pledge to fully enforce the UN sanctions against Pyongyang.
According to the latest trade statistics from the Customs Administration, exports to the DPRK fell nearly 7% in September compared to a year ago, while imports fell almost 38%.
China has made its economic sacrifice in supporting UN resolutions, especially for the Dandong economy. Its seafood and textile industries have suffered big losses, not to mention the mass layoff of labor in those trade companies which are affected by the sanctions.
Liu says the key to revive Dandong's economy hinges upon one and the only factor, whether or not Pyongyang will give up its nuclear ambitions.
So likely DPRK will dominate the discussions between President Trump and President Xi. At the moment, both sides seem to stand pretty firm on the issue, like China has put forward the do-halt approach, while the Trump administration has been blasting China for not doing enough to rein in DPRK's nuclear programs. But we've noticed that President Trump was striking a more conciliative tone during his visit in Seoul, like he gave an address to the South Korean National Assembly on Wednesday, urging Kim Jong-un to make a deal at the negotiating table. So instead of threatening war, he says like it will work out, it has to work out. And pundits say that his rhetoric gives optimism about the upcoming meeting between the two leaders, especially the possibility that the two most powerful economies might reach some sort of consensus on the DPRK issue. Back to you, Qiuyuan.
Well, thank you so much. Suha live in the city of Dandong on the border with DPRK, and also a close neighbor to the DPRK. South Korea is definitely quite concerned with the nuclear program.
Yeah, without question. We heard President Trump speak to the National Assembly there recently. So let's get the perspective from Seoul with our correspondent, Jack Barton, who's standing by live with more on all this. So, Jack, Trump was in Seoul. He toned down his rhetoric against the DPRK, calling for Pyongyang to come to the table, make a deal. In his speech, he also held up the prospect of engagement, though, with Pyongyang. So what signal do you think he's trying to send?
It was a very different Donald Trump we heard speaking at the National Assembly and throughout this trip. You could say more presidential in that apart from trying a surprise visit to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, he didn't depart from the agenda, but more importantly and uncharacteristically perhaps, he didn't depart from the script. There was no off-the-cuff remarks or nicknames like Little Rocket Man. He didn't use any fiery apocalyptic rhetoric. And as you said, he appeared to hold out an olive branch, saying he hoped for the prosperity of the DPRK under the right circumstances. Clearly, he was pushing for dialogue there. But when we really break it down, the message, the fundamental message, didn't really change from what we've heard from Donald Trump for the past few months. He still said all options are on the table. That means the US would consider a preemptive strike if that nuclear program continues. He warned the DPRK not to indulge in any further provocations. He said that could be a fatal mistake. And he made it clear that the US was still taking an extremely tough position and a tough view, saying it would never tolerate that program going forward. So the fundamental message we heard was still exactly the same. Nothing really changed. What did change is that message had been sort of tidied up, toned down, unified, and turned into something of more a comprehensive US policy on the DPRK, which is what a lot of people had really wanted, rather than a series of inconsistent tweets.
And that is a very good point to make. You're right. The tone changed, but the message has not. Okay, Jack Barton live for us in Seoul with that perspective. Thank you so much. I also want to bring back our guest here, Mr. Dalloway and Professor Rick Dunham, who's in the studio with us. So let's talk more about the DPRK issue. Clearly a big divide between China and the United States over the DPRK. Do you expect, Professor Dunham, that these two countries can actually meet in the middle and reach a consensus on what to do with the Korean Peninsula issue?
I think that's very difficult. I think we've seen two big changes that are important. The first one is during the campaign, Donald Trump said, and he tweeted, if China wanted to take care of it, it could be done like that.
Is that fair?
No. And now he realizes that it's complicated. And he said it's complicated. And he has said repeatedly that China is doing its best. So that's a big change. The second change was yesterday, as we just heard, when he said he opened the door to dialogue. 2 or 3 weeks ago, he tweeted out that his Secretary of State was wasting his time talking about diplomacy. So that is a shift. Those are two important things as he comes to China, because China has not been any more successful than the United States at forcing a change in the behavior of North Korea. So maybe they can come up with a united strategy. The problem has been in the bilateral approach is the missile defense system. Maybe they can come up with a compromise so that the United States and China are on the same page and we don't have wedges that are driving them apart, as they both have the same goal of denuclearization.
Yeah, it does seem like the U.S. president is taking on a different tone, a more measured approach since he's taking on this Asian trip. And Mr. Dalloway, let me just ask you this. As we heard earlier, China has supported the UN resolution and all these sanctions with a economic sacrifice. I mean, these measures could actually affect Chinese citizens. From your perspective, can China or should China do more, to pressure the DPRK?
Of course, China can do more, of course, but should China do more? I think China's position, I think this position is correct, that China only follows the UN resolution. If this is the collective decision that all the countries believe that in the UN Security Council believe that we should together do more, including China. China is willing to do more, to make more sacrifice. But I think it's unfair to say that it's your fault, you should do more. It's just because of you, because of China, that the North Koreans are developing, nuclear and missile capability. On this issue, I think China has a very strong sense of frustration, because Chinese believe that the root cause of the nuclear issue, North Korea nuclear issue, is the insecurity, sense of insecurity of the North Korean. This is a problem between the U.S. and the North Korean. It's not a problem between China and the North Korean. And also in 1990s and also in 2000s, so there are two major diplomatic efforts. One is the four-party talks. The other is the six-party talks. Now, each time actually the parties reach some kind of agreement, but because of the lack of mutual trust between the North Korea, the DPRK, and the United States, so that agreement has not been implemented very well. So China think we have already done what we can do or what we should do. So China feel this is something unfair. We have already seen in that video clip that the local people in Dandong suffered from that. So we pay the price. We make some sacrifice. We are willing to do that if it's in the UN framework. But we don't think we should. It's fair to just go beyond the UN resolution framework to let China do.
And why is that framework so important to China? Why the hesitation to do more? Since you say that the country could.
Yes, of course, because China think that the UN is the only legitimate body, multilateral body that can make major decisions on the security issues. So China think it's not legitimate to for any country use a unilateral way to have this kind of sanction over the other country. So it should go through this multilateral mechanism like UN. So this is the reason.
So to flip that, I wonder, there's this constant back and forth between the United States and China. China says it's doing all it can. U.S. says, yes, but you can do more. So there's a messaging element to this as well. So how can China convince the United States that it prefers to work under the UN arrangement here and that it is not comfortable doing anything more?
Well, I think a lot of it is posturing and the United States saying China can do more. Well, by definition, you can always do more, but what the United States wants is for China to do it through the United Nations. And I think that President Trump understands right now that nothing is going to happen unilaterally with China, but I think that the U.S. administration will keep pushing because if there is no progress, the United States wants to tighten the sanctions as much as possible, but China will only go so far. And so, to me, the big question is, can Donald Trump engage? Will he engage? Because if we think of the root cause as the insecurity of North Korea about its own future, meaning the fear that there would be invasion or regime change attempts, you have to have engagement of the U.S. president, which really hasn't happened since George W. Bush was president, and it looked like they were going to open a railroad from South Korea to Pyongyang, but it never got beyond the DMZ.
All right, stick around. Another important topic we want to talk about today, security cooperation. Between Beijing and Washington, it's considered a significant issue, especially on matters such as anti-terrorism efforts and regional security concerns. And more communication and negotiation between the two largest economies are significant. So stay tuned for more on our special program.
We do not always 100% agree to all the foreign policies of the U.S. And maybe it is also true that the United States does not always 100% with our foreign policy. That's why we need this high-level communication.
And again, you are watching live special coverage on CGTN of President Trump's arrival to Beijing and his welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People.
And that's right. Let's bring back our guests to talk more about security cooperation. Since the president's Mar-a-Lago state visits there, officials have said the 4 high-level dialogue mechanism was established there in Florida and helped promote its bilateral ties. But how do you evaluate the mechanism? Are they effective?
I think so. We haven't had any flashpoints. We haven't had any major bilateral problems. The closest you have are close calls in the South China Sea. But I think that the communication is there, military to military and administration to administration. I think the bilateral works well. To me, the question is, can you expand the bilateral framework to global issues? Syria, Middle East, Iran, other things like that. But starting with a bilateral relationship allows you to jump off where the two countries working together can help to solve some of the intractable global problems.
And considering there's so much division, though, and so much divide between the two countries, do you really think that they can achieve unity under these circumstances?
I think, to achieve unity probably is a too high goal to get. But I do think that we can achieve cooperation on specific issues. We can achieve kind of consensus on specific issues. I think we have already achieved something like a 100-day plan, and we have, like what Rick only mentioned, just now mentioned, the 4 mechanisms that we already have that very successfully. And I think there are some specific outcomes, like from the social and the cultural agreement. We have this kind of education exchanges, and also on the cybersecurity and also the law enforcement. We also have some specific outcomes. So I don't think we can just like two islands. We can have the unity. I think that is a too high. The goal is too high. Yeah, but I think more realistic goal is the two big countries like US and China, so different countries, we can sit together, we can manage our differences. We do not let those differences evolve into conflicts. And then we can sit together, try to dig out the things that we can work together, both bilaterally and globally. I think this is the goal that we should strive for.
But do you think the two presidents are on the same frequency when it comes to, these thorny issues like cybersecurity, security cooperations? Some predict that President Trump will flex his deal-making muscle. How will that be received by the Chinese counterpart?
I think we cannot rely all things on the two presidents. So that's the reason we have the four mechanism, and that's the reason we have a lot of other mechanisms between the two countries. I think President Trump is, he focuses maybe only on China. I think only two things that we discussed: North Korea and also trade. I think this everything for Trump. Yeah, but it's true there are so many issues like cyber, like South China Sea, like education, etc. So we should let our two governments work together. Of course, but this is a challenge. Also a challenge. I think Rick mentioned this earlier this morning. I think on the U.S. side, the Trump administration still have a lot of vacancy to fill in his government. So they don't have like assistant. Still, they don't have the assistant secretary of state. Ms. Susan Thornton is acting, and they still don't have assistant secretary of defense. So this, I think, will have some negative, influence on this interaction between the two governments.
And that's a great point. I mean, help us understand how critical these lower-level employees are. Is this part of the reason why we see not a lot of movement necessarily on some of the big issues between the two countries?
That's right. It's why there was a lot of progress during the Obama years, moving together on cybersecurity, on law enforcement cooperation. This is the problem when you don't have people with authority in the U.S. government positions. You have the big policy being made. I mean, the president says, I don't need these jobs filled, I am the decision maker.
Right.
But truly, if you're going to negotiate something on cybersecurity, you need that person who has authority and the staff to negotiate. So yes, they're on the same page with cybersecurity. They're on the same page with law enforcement. But there are a lot of specific details that need to be negotiated. And then I think there are bigger problems on cyber governance, where I think the two countries are far apart. And they can't even have discussions without the Americans having someone in place to talk to a Chinese counterpart.
Yeah, how do you make the deal if you don't have the deal makers there? Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to talk about this throughout the day. Of course, President Trump, President Xi, meeting right now behind closed doors at the Great Hall of the People. We're expecting them to come out in a few minutes and deliver remarks. We'll bring that to you live, but for the moment, we're going to take a short break. You're watching CGTN.
CGTN puts you in the front seat as the leaders of the world's most powerful economies meet. Following President Xi's latest U.S. visit, Donald Trump makes his first presidential trip to China. On the table, business deals, regional security, and how to strengthen global governance. Our team of international reporters and analysts will bring you all sides of the story. Stick with CGTN and see the difference.
I've been to China, I guess, 2 or 3 times now, and every time I go, I come away just with a better understanding of the market and what's happening there.
We're all going to have to take some risks. Some of these projects, and people come say, we don't want to risk. I mean, I think in this world, there's nothing is risk-free. It's all about risk and reward.
I think that's a very important message, that both the United States and China keep their doors open, first of all, for dialogue between our leaders.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all.
The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
Well, welcome back. Many experts believe the two countries will use this opportunity to further develop their economic relationship. The world's two largest economies are also each other's #1 trading partner. But both have their own agenda, which is often in conflict. However, in April, the two leaders agreed to fast-track their strategic partnership with a 100-day action plan. CGTN's Nathan King has more now on how this agreement benefited both countries and what lies ahead in their economic relations.
At their Mar-a-Lago summit back in April, Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Donald Trump fast-tracked economic negotiations. First, a 100-day plan of action, which, among other things, allowed US beef to be imported into China after a 14-year absence, and Chinese cooked chicken products to be imported into the US for the first time. And then Chinese and US officials back in July, at their first comprehensive and economic dialogue, reported progress on specifics. But when it comes to the wider trade and economic relationship, the US is asking for more.
This is only possible if there is a more fair and balanced economic relationship between the United States and China. This means providing access for American firms in China as we provide access for Chinese firms in the United States. It means addressing the imbalances caused by the Chinese intervention in its economy, as well as addressing the impact of industrial, agricultural, technological, and cyber policies.
The pace may not be what the US wants, but China continues to open up. Since that dialogue in July, European airspace giant Airbus has officially opened a major facility in China, and European investors have been investing in China's Rust Belt.
In general, the attitude to foreign companies here, reported by our members, is pretty good. Yeah. So the government, as said already, they spare no efforts in order to make it easier for foreign companies to come here to promote their place.
At the 19th Party Congress, Xi recommitted China to further reform and opening up. And on this state visit to China, US President Donald Trump will be pressing his Chinese hosts on that commitment. US Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross is on the trip, accompanied by many US business executives eager to work with China on everything from cars to climate. The comprehensive and economic dialogue paved the way for potential agreements in areas ranging from natural gas to more US access to financial services in China. In return, Beijing would like fewer restrictions on US high-tech exports to China, including dual-use technologies with civilian and military applications. The comprehensive economic dialogue, first held here in Washington, raised the economic relationship between China and the US to new levels. And the hope is that what was first held here in the US will bear fruit in Beijing this week. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
All right, now we want to get back to our reporter in front of the Great Hall of People. Sui Ting is there live for us. Ting, we were watching the welcoming ceremony all together. What was your observation of the ceremony? What is the difference this time for the two leaders meeting compared with the previous two times?
Yes, Chiu-Yuan, I'm a frequent visitor to the Great Hall of the People in Beijing because usually I attend many of the welcoming ceremony held by President Xi Jinping to those visiting heads of states from foreign countries. And this time when I just witnessed this grand welcoming ceremony held by President Xi Jinping for the visiting US President Donald Trump, it's very impressive and there are lots of highlights. And previously I talked to some of the students from the, America. They just study here in China from the primary schools, and they told me that they're also very exciting to be here to witness this very grand ceremony. And they told me that they love China so much and they want to be ambassador themselves to make further friendship and also closer ties between the two countries. And you know that another thing is very significant is that the military band here also just give the audiences a very good performance. they played an additional song that is the national march of the United States of America, that is the Stars and Stripes Forever. And for more on that, we are very glad to join by the leader of the military band from the Chinese People's Liberation Army. His name is Zhou Rui. 邹蕊邹团长你好，我们那个中央电视台中国国际电视台非常荣幸邀请您接受我们的专访。那么在您是非常经常到这个人民大会堂来就是参加这个欢迎仪式。那么这次对您来说印象最深刻的是什么呢？相比于以往有些什么样的亮点呢？
很高兴啊，刚刚完成了欢迎仪式的任务，我很兴奋，确实很高兴。其实呢，45年前就是尼克松总统首次访华的时候，就他在中国的破冰之旅，我们在当时演奏了很多著名的美国音乐，博得了尼克松总统的高度赞扬。尼克松总统当时我记得他说，在他答谢宴会的祝酒词中，专门有一段讲军乐团。他说：“我不仅要感谢那些为我们准备这么盛大晚宴的人，更要感谢那些为我们演奏这么美好音乐的人。我在国外从来没有听到过演奏这么美好的美国音乐。”其实那个时候，我们利用手中的乐器传递了中国人民友谊、和平与美好的这样一个愿望。45年过去了，其实这45年来呢，我们见证了这个中美友谊不断发展的历史。特别是呢，每一个美国总统到访，我们都有我们解放军军乐团的音乐作为欢迎。今天呢，我特别的高兴。为了欢迎特朗普总统来访，我们在欢迎仪式上特别设计了，安排了这个美国著名作曲家苏萨创作的《星条旗永不落进行曲》。更让我高兴的是，两国元首长时间的在乐队前面驻留来聆听，表现出了两国元首很高的那种艺术修养和风范，更是对我们工作的认可。这是让我非常高兴的。为了演奏好这首音乐，我们特别在自己的乐队当中增加了铜管的编制，以更好的演奏表达这种乐曲的风格。我想我们的演奏呢，大家都听到了。我高兴，大家也高兴。这种友谊就确实用音乐搭起了友谊与和平的桥梁。我想呢，解放军军乐团啊，作为国家的礼仪乐队，我们总把自己当成一种绿叶，用自己辛勤的工作去衬托国家内政外交这朵红花，用自己的努力吧，用自己的军乐这种艺术，为党、国家和军队的外交事业做出自己的贡献。
好的，非常感谢您，也非常感谢军乐团，着实代表了我们的中国形象。谢谢您，谢谢，非常感谢。Well, the director of the military band said that this year marks the 45th anniversary of the normalization of relations between the two countries. And 45 years ago, when the U.S. former President Richard Nixon was here in China, he has very high praised the military band's performance. He said that he has never heard so beautiful lyrics played by the Chinese military band to American audiences. And he also said that the military band just played very well the Stars and Stripes Forever, this song, just act as a bridge connecting the Chinese people and also the American people. So that he said it's very significant, and he's also very impressed by the military band's song played during the welcoming ceremony. 邱元.
And Eugene, this, of course, is Trump's first state visit to China, and both nations have left no stone unturned preparing for this. What will both leaders be discussing today?
Well, Chu Yuan, you know that this time is the Trump's first state visit to China since he assumed the presidency in January, and it's also the first time that he's also the first head of state to visit China since the 19th CPC National Congress. And you know that the both leaders attached very significance to this visit, and President Xi Jinping has held the welcoming ceremony, and they will have the business community event, and also hold the large group and small group deep bilateral talks and also meet the press to brief the outcomes of their meeting. And this time we called it the State Visit Plus experience. That means that the President Xi Jinping will just provide U.S. President Donald Trump with the highest standards in the reciprocity to the hospitality he received from President Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago in April this year. And you know that later they will also hold talks between each other, and the trade cooperation and the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue will surely be the key topics on the negotiation table. And you know that one thing very significant is that this time Donald Trump is also accompanied by a large delegation of 24 of the U.S. businessmen, and they're looking forward to sign lots of MOUs and also contracts focusing on the economics and also trade and also agriculture and energy sector. So we're very looking forward to the outcomes they will reach later today. Back to you, Tu Yuan.
Thank you so much, Yu Ting live in the heart of Beijing. Now, I want to also talk more about trade and how is bilateral trade between U.S. and China. How does the big picture look now? And my colleague Lily joins me now in the studio.
Yes,
Lily.
Of course, Troy, and we are seeing a boom in bilateral trade in recent years, and of course that is benefiting both countries. Let's start with the U.S. exports to China. Now, take a look at that number. U.S. exports to China actually surged, let's see, 500 times in year 2016 from year 2001. Now, that is a huge number considering the U.S. exports to the world only grew by 90% during the same period of time. And some of the top exports from the U.S. to China: airplanes, cars, soybeans, as well as cotton. And the U.S. has maintained a surplus in trade, service trade with China for a long time. The U.S. registered $56 billion surplus in service trade in China in 2016, and that was 40 times the amount recorded back in 2006. And the United States is also a hot destination for Chinese tourists and students. Chinese tourists and students in the U.S. spent $51 billion last year alone. Spending power there, and China is of course opening up its financial markets, and American banks, insurance, fund management and security companies, they are increasing their presence here in the country. And China is also benefiting from this bilateral trade, of course, and Chinese exports to the U.S. stood at $389 billion last year, and compare that number with year 2001, that was 7.2 times. And imports of high-tech products from the U.S., of course, have been helping to bring advanced technologies to China. Now, the U.S. saw a trade deficit with China in year 2016, but that number was already down $20 billion last year from the previous year. So, speaking of the trade surplus, actually the China-U.S. trade surplus, and as we're saying, that figure could have been elevated due to several factors. For instance, an unbalanced export mixture. The U.S. exports to China have higher added value, as we know, and the United States have been citing intellectual property concerns when it scrutinizes its high-tech products to enter the Chinese market. And another factor would be the math. And according to the OECD, a new calculation that takes into consideration added value and U.S. imported raw materials, China's trade surplus with the U.S. might be a quarter smaller. Now, that said, Chuyan, we know China is now relying less on export to generate growth as the country transits into a more consumption-fueled economy.
That's right. Thank you so much, Lily, for bringing us that.
Yeah, some great numbers without question. Okay, thank you. Well, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly said in an interview with Fox News that China had beaten the U.S. significantly on trade, but added that President Donald Trump was committed to changing the nature of the relationship. Last year, the U.S. trade deficit with China exceeded $300 billion. Kelly indicated that the United States was to blame for that. He also suggested the changing of its trade relationship with China would come through diplomatic efforts. Now, many Chinese and U.S. citizens in Beijing have voiced their expectations for Trump's first visit to China, with bilateral cooperation and economic ties being among the most anticipated topics. So let's hear what some bystanders had to say.
I hope Trump can learn more Chinese with his granddaughter.
I think U.S. people and also Chinese people are both very practical, so hopefully, can find some areas to cooperate.
I hope both the U.S. and China develop well, cooperate with and learn from each other, and contribute more to the world.
market continues to open up, foreign institutions will continue to benefit as well.
We welcome the rhetoric, but we're more eager to see specific actions.
So we're looking for transparency, we're looking for clarity, and I think that will help to build trust between the two countries.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN. Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from my room.
I'm members of the Mark, what can you tell us about events happening there? Politics.
This is a pretty picture. Timing of the event.
Back over to Beijing.
To go after them.
All about
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to our special coverage. The reform and opening up policy initiated by Chinese leaders nearly 4 decades ago have lifted millions out of poverty. The policy has guided China's transformation into a moderately prosperous society. As stated clearly in his work report to the 19th CPC National Congress, President Xi Jinping vowed to deepen reform across all spheres of Chinese society. And now Shanghai is known as China's commercial center, and it's a good example of how China has opened up over the years. Thousands of foreign companies and many financial institutions are based in the city. And now for more on this, we can go live to CGTN correspondent Hunan. He can tell us more about how foreign enterprises operate in Shanghai. Hunan.
Well, yeah, first let's take a look at some important figures that released yesterday on the government press conference. Well, Shanghai has over 47,000 foreign companies now, taking up to 2% of the total number of companies in Shanghai. However, this 2% contributed 27% of the city's GDP last year and 65% of the import-export volume, as well as 33% of the total tax revenue and 20% of the employment. Well, that echoes to a survey from the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, saying that 77% of the American companies in China remained profitable last year. Well, these statistics indicated that foreign companies have become a major driving force for the economic development and industrial restructure. And Shanghai, in the next 5 years, will keep focusing on the manufacturing as guided in the Made in China 2025 plan to make itself an innovation hub center for the global economy. And the Shanghai government has taken measures to achieve that goal. Well, the latest good news is that on June 28th, the Shanghai government published a revised foreign investment catalog, which including a negative list, which is the first list of such kind in China. Well, this list identifies the sectors that are off limits or restricted for foreign companies, for foreign investments, and the sectors that the Chinese government encourages foreign companies to invest in. Well, the good news is that this list has shortened the off-limits and the restricted sectors from 36 to 28, which means foreign companies now may have access or have easier access to certain sectors, including highway transportation, railway transportation, manufacturing, production, and the processing of certain rare metals. And financially speaking, Shanghai has taken 10 key measures, including the promoting of the CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, and encouraging countries, the One Belt, One Road countries especially, to release Panda Bond in Shanghai, and to encourage and promoting China Development Bank and the China Export-Import Bank to release loans for infrastructure construction programs in the One Belt One Road countries. And by taking all these measures, Shanghai is aiming to be the center for both the investing and financing, as well as the RMB Financial Services Center. Well, back to you, Qiuyuan.
Thank you so much, Hunan, joining us live in Shanghai, the financial hub of China. Now we want to talk more about China's reform efforts and what it means for the world. So, Mr. Dunham, in his latest work report, the president stressed the importance of letting foreign capital flow into China. How will American businessmen view this?
Well, they say there's not enough opportunity yet. Yes, as you heard in the report, there is slight opening. It is steady, but there are a lot of services, particularly in financial services, where American companies believe they could be much more involved than now. The complaint of the American government is that the Chinese government is protectionist of certain industries to allow them to take root before they're open to international competition. Particularly, that's one where the search engines were with Baidu. The U.S. government says the Chinese government is protecting it from Google, which is seen as a superior product, to help create a Chinese big data giant. So that's the big issue is for the American companies how they can enter the Chinese economy and compete freely. China also wants to be able to go into the U.S., both in terms of foreign direct investment and in terms of some of the questions that involve technology transfer, where the U.S. government stops Chinese companies from buying into American companies because of the potential dual use for military purposes. So that's one where both sides can engage, but it's been going much more slowly than American businesses want. Yes, there's a presence for American banks, but they see so many loans going on. They see so much growth in China. They want a bigger piece of the action. And that's one area where there has been constant tension. And it's moving in the direction of cooperation, but moving very slowly.
So do a lot of American firms still look at China as a lucrative investment opportunity?
I believe so. I believe it's both as an investment opportunity and a huge untapped market, or a market potential. If you look at the Facebooks of the world, they see the market. They see the giant population, and they can get in, and they're not in right now. With others, it is investment and a question of making money based on China, on opportunities in China, as opposed to just the market of 1.37 billion people.
And Don, let me bring you in here because it's interesting to think about. It's only been 4 decades, which is not a lot of time since China began its process of reform and opening up. We hear the complaints that China is not doing enough fast enough. What are your thoughts on all this?
I think if we compare with 4 decades ago, I think of course China has already made a big progress in opening up, and actually many American companies and of course other countries' companies earn a lot of money. That's the reason why they are still here. That's the reason why they still complain. I think if they feel totally desperate, they will leave China, but they are still here. But we must admit that there is some changing attitude among the business community here, the U.S. business community here towards U.S.-China relations. I think there are two, this is a it's like a two-folded story. One is what Rick mentioned, their complaint about China. They hope that China can open up more, let them, go into more, economic sectors. But on the other hand, I think it's also a reality that, doing business in China is not as easy as 4 decades ago, because China now is much more advanced economy now. So let's say in 1980s, I think, no matter who you are, what business you do, if you are from the U.S., you have capital, you have technology, you have good service, good products, then you can, earn money here in China. It's very easy, relatively easy. But now, today, I think it's, relatively difficult, and the Chinese government does not give the foreign investment special treatment. They give them the national citizenship treatment. So that's a change that could make people feel uncomfortable and not,
Yeah, it's a complicated market with a lot of potential for sure.
That's right. And Mike joins us again for exchanges of the two countries. Mike.
Yes, President Trump has said the best relationship he has with a foreign leader is the one he has with President Xi. That may be by design, especially on the part of Xi Jinping, as CGTN's Jessica Stone explains.
Long before Chinese President Xi Jinping ushered in a new era for China, he made his personal touch one of the hallmarks of China's diplomacy. As Vice President, Xi went out of his way to see the American family who hosted him 27 years earlier. The following year, he shed his suit jacket and tie for the so-called shirt-sleeve summit with then U.S. President Barack Obama.
He has come to this top international stage with a very strong confidence in China's position.
But how would Xi react to the populism of Donald Trump?
China's taking our jobs.
Would he stay calm if Trump unleashed a dose of his China-bashing rhetoric?
Myself had some doubt if he could come to the U.S. at this type of situation. He established very strong personal contacts, personal trust with President Trump.
Both leaders later talked of their friendship. China expert Cheng Li says Xi and Trump may share little in style, but they do have common values.
Both of them are nationalist leaders, and one is want to make rejuvenate Chinese culture and so-called Chinese dream. The other is called to make America great again. And both of them do not like bureaucracy.
Trump often talks about his personal chemistry with Xi.
I made a friend in China, President Xi, and yesterday he basically took the banking industry away from North Korea.
Personal relationships helped define ties between the U.S. and China, beginning with Mao Zedong welcoming Richard Nixon to Beijing. The same appears true of this friendship, but it hasn't silenced the mutual complaints. Washington criticizes China on trade and its island building in the South China Sea. Beijing rejects these criticisms and opposes rhetoric like this.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
The U.S. has not changed those policies. Those issues are still very complicated, very important for the leaders of both countries to deal with.
Complicated and inescapable. China and the United States are among each other's top trading partners. And if Pyongyang does launch a missile at the United States, the ensuing war would happen on China's doorstep. Jessica Stone, CGTN, Beijing.
As we've been showing you, President Trump's first stop in Beijing was the Forbidden City. One of the people working to preserve and celebrate the site is American Nancy Berliner of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. We recently caught up with her there for an inside look at her work.
I'm Nancy Berliner. I'm the Wutong Curator of Chinese Art at the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston. I had studied art as an undergraduate as well as Chinese, and then I ended up going to the Central Academy of Arts in Beijing. And though I had wanted to study painting, Chinese painting, while I was there, I was actually put into the Chinese art history course. Suddenly I was exposed to the wonderful history of Chinese art and Chinese painting, and got excited about that history, got interested in all different types of Chinese art. Maybe 2,500 years ago? I wrote a book and put together an exhibition at the same time and traveled it around the United States. And before I knew it, I suddenly was a curator of Chinese art. I have been involved in a project in the Forbidden City for over the past 10 years. The project is the Qianlong Garden Conservation Project, and I'm an advisor to World Monuments Fund who collaborates with the Palace Museum on this project. We discovered more things behind other artworks that had been hidden for 250 years that were in absolutely perfect condition because they had been covered up for so long. And we were able to bring these to the United States and exhibit them. When I look at Chinese art, I think of it as Chinese visual culture, not just fine art. I look at visual objects that are created by all different types of people within a society. That it's not just the fine artists with the well-known signatures, but it's also people in the countryside who are making patchwork quilts for their beds, or it's people making woodblock prints because they can't afford to have original paintings hanging on their walls. Chinese society is very rich in visual culture, and I think it's important to recognize everything that contributes to our visual surroundings.
Another hallmark of the cultural ties linking China and the United States, giant pandas. What many refer to as panda diplomacy actually started back in 1972, not long after President Richard Nixon's historic trip to China. The National Zoo here in Washington became the first zoo in the United States to welcome pandas. Since then, scientists in China and the United States have collaborated to establish a global conservation and breeding system that has significantly boosted the panda population. Ping pong diplomacy also dates back nearly 5 decades. The sport helped open the door to better relations between China and the United States, and it's back, helping to bridge the gap between the Americans and the Chinese. CGTN's John Terrett checked out a friendly competition recently in the lobby of the United Nations.
Do you recognize this man? You've seen him countless times on TV at the United Nations. It's China's ambassador to the UN, showing that away from the Security Council, he's a pretty mean ping pong player, a real crowd favorite. The UN table tennis team is playing a team of former and current Chinese champions in one of the many lobbies here at UN headquarters on Manhattan's East Side.
I'm really excited and really impressed that so many people here in UN are fans of table tennis. I'm very happy to see that a lot of them have come here today to play with us as well as to watch these wonderful games.
The game is fast and furious and much more fun when seen in real life rather than on the telly.
Well, the sign says it all. It is 45 years since the first Chinese ping pong delegation came here to UN headquarters in New York City.
It was 1971-72, and China and the US weren't on speaking terms, hadn't been for years, until a ping pong team from the US visited China and the Chinese team came here. It may be coincidental, but within a year, President Nixon was in China, inaugurating a new era in diplomacy between Beijing and Washington.
I'm really proud to be a player of table tennis. We are very glad that table tennis can play such a historic role in opening the relationship between China and the US.
Among the guest players on the UN team is Team USA's Xinhua, who had a few tips for aspiring players.
I'll say 50% mental and then 50% physical. If you're only good at physical skills, you're not getting anywhere.
Let me warn you, young man, I used to be good at this game when I was your age, okay? Oh! Ah!
Of course, an empty table tennis table was far too tempting an opportunity, so I challenged Xinhua to a knockabout. I gave him a good run for his money, of course, but in the end, he finished me off with a mighty forehand. John Terrett, CGTN, New York.
John needs to work on his game. Let's send it back to Beijing, where Li Qiuwen continues our coverage of President Trump's state visit to China.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was fun to watch.
Mighty forehand indeed.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
So we want to talk more about the cultural and people-to-people exchange. So let me bring back our guests. Ms. Zhao Wei first. You know, Trump's granddaughter is studying Chinese. He has actually brought a video of her and showed it to the president this time during his visit. How does this help?
Of course, this is a very, just like the kids in the welcome ceremony. I think it's a very human and very soft part of this hard bilateral relations. And I think this kind of cultural exchanges is very important for the bilateral relations for two reasons. One is it shows that we are all so similar. You know, we are humankinds. We are, you know, we from different country, different culture, but we are very similar. We appreciate the beauty when we see the beautiful things, right? We share teamwork when we play ping pong together. So we are all human beings, so we are very close. So this is one thing, and I mean, can create this kind of chemistry between different people. And also another role is to tell us we are different. So we are from different civilization, we are from different culture. So sometimes people don't understand why the people from the other country behave not like us, or they don't think in our way, or why their political system, why their economic system is different from my system. I think my system is perfect. Why you don't adopt my system, right? So by, you know, through these people-to-people exchanges, cultural exchanges, and also like the visit to Forbidden City, learning the Chinese history, you know that, you know, they have their own history, they have their own, you know, reason, have their, you know, their today's system, and they have their own rationale in their foreign policy.
Well, let me ask you about that disconnect. I think that's so interesting what you said, that, you know, of course, each side thinks their side is better. Why do you think there is such a disconnect sometimes between the Chinese culture and the American culture?
I think, you know, as a watcher, as an observer of the U.S. system, I think that yes, it's true that U.S. system has a lot of advantage that China has already learned from the U.S. and will also continue to learn. But the system here, I think, grow from the history, from the experience, and also from our culture, from our experience. It's grow out of this territory, this land, and also I think the U.S. system is similar. You know, it's the same. It's grow from your historic experience, from the land and the people there in the United States. So it's not about which one is better, but I think this is just like a fruit, you know, grow from the tree. It's rooted on a different land, a different history. So we should appreciate each other's system and learn from each other.
Yeah, very different cultures, very different languages. There's a lot there, and I guess we are looking at these live pictures here, or maybe not. Earlier, they were recorded video, excuse me, of the President Trump's visit. You know, Rick, one thing I think about here when I listen to this is, you know, the Chinese are so careful. Everything is so choreographed. There's a lot of symbolism and meaning in even the smallest gestures. Do you worry that sometimes this gets lost on this current administration?
Yes. This administration is different than others that I covered in Washington because the symbolism was very important. I mean, I was covering some of the global meetings with President Bush and President Clinton, and they were very careful about every detail. This administration, this president, it's the big picture. It's respect. It's treating him royally. And so yes, but you can see he appreciates the culture. First, his discussion of 5,000 years of Chinese history. He remembers that now, so he's learned something. And the other is just the fact that he is proud that his granddaughter can speak Chinese. And I mean, I feel similarly from personal example. My nephew Eric Dunham had a friend from Shanghai in his school in Arlington, Virginia, right outside of Washington, in 2nd grade. Now they're juniors in high school. They still email each other. They have she's back living in Shanghai, but they have learned from each other's culture through their entire time growing up in school. This is important. They see not just a country that they read about, but they know a person and they have a personal connection. And I think that's important. And that I mean, that transcends the sort of Donald Trump personality because you have these human connections.
Yeah, and China really sees the importance of the soft power. I mean, it was recently elevated to a national priority by the president. But I mean, U.S. has such a great soft power. You know, the biggest or the most famous universities, the sports sector, the Hollywood. What can China and the U.S. Maybe learn from each other on this?
I think we already China like in recent years we send hundreds of thousands of students to the United States. I think more than 300,000 Chinese students studying in the U.S. I think what they are learning from the U.S. I think it's including culture, it's including science, it's also including the social science, their political system, economic system. So I totally agree with you that I think the U.S. has a stronger soft power, that China can, attract Chinese students, attract average Chinese people to visit the U.S. Well, on the other side, I think China's soft power is increasing. Originally, people like to talk about those Chinese food or kung fu or panda, this kind of thing as China's soft power. But now I think China have new soft power, like so-called for creation, great invention, in modern China, like WeChat, like online payment, like bullet train. I think those modern civilization that Chinese people are creating is a new soft power, which I think the U.S. should learn or can learn from China. So I think both China's soft power is increasing too. So it's a more balanced soft power relationship now.
Yeah, quickly, I want to get your thoughts on that, Rick, really quickly here. I mean, when you look at China's soft power, how do you think that's perceived in the rest of the world?
Generally, if it's thought of culturally, it's good, whether it's pandas or human beings. Cultural exchanges. Where you get into issues is if you talk about economic colonialism, and this is something where the United States had problems in the world, from Africa, Asia, where it was seen as pushing for economic power. But I mean, I think that yes, the U.S. is a draw for Chinese students, but I think every Chinese student who visits in the United States is a plus for China because Americans meet real people and not just headlines on television.
Yeah, the first step to understanding each other is just speaking with each other and meeting each other. Okay, thank you guys so much. Well, China and the United States have a history in health which dates back to the year 1835, and that's when U.S. missionary doctors helped establish the first Western medical hospitals in southern China's Guangdong province. Over the course of almost 2 centuries, their cooperation in health has greatly expanded to benefit not only their two peoples, but also some of the world's poorest. So one example, a global health outfit in Beijing. CGTN's Shu Mingxi has more.
These researchers from the Global Health Drug Discovery Institute, or Deedee, are investigating new ways to treat tuberculosis. According to the World Health Organization, TB has been the world's deadliest infectious disease for the last 3 years.
Most of the drugs for tuberculosis were developed 40 or 50 years ago. So, new cases with resistance to previously developed drugs continue to emerge.
The Deedee Institute, now in its 2nd year, is a joint initiative between the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Beijing municipal government, and Xinhua University. It focuses on developing drugs for TB, malaria, and other infectious diseases disproportionately affecting developing countries.
And if you look at some of the data, it's actually quite shocking. So, for example, over the last 40 years, there are about 1,500 new drugs being launched, but only less than 20 of them are actually targeting infectious disease affecting the poor.
It's not hard to understand why drug manufacturers are reluctant to invest. It's simply not profitable. Discovering and developing a new drug involves a lot of trial and error, so the process is both costly and time-consuming. However, Deedee aims to shorten that process by combining a world-class drug discovery model replicated from its partner organization in the U.S. known as Calibre. And it's also hoping to draw expertise and talent from Tsinghua University in Beijing.
Certainly, Tsinghua University is very strong in structural biology. Structural biology is a central piece in drug discovery. So leveraging Tsinghua structural biology and the computational chemistry expertise, we can really be more unique.
It's not just money and talent that China can offer its partners. It also has decades of experience combating disease and poverty as a developing country itself.
Despite China has its own challenges, but there is a vast supply of high-quality, low-cost products that could be beneficial to other developing countries' people. Artemisinin is a great example, where it's China's own invention for anti-malaria, but also many others like contraceptive products, like bed nets for malaria, like condoms for HIV control and all that.
Deedee has opened a new path for cooperation between China and the U.S. for the benefit of the world's poorest. And after the two governments reaffirmed their commitment to enhance health cooperation in June, there's hope that there can be more initiatives like Deedee in the future. Xu Mengqi, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, ahead of Trump's visit to China, both countries are examining different opportunities. Let's hear what some U.S. politicians have to say about that.
In an exclusive interview with CCTV, the United States Senator from Montana, Steve Daines, hailed the bilateral relationship as the most important in the world, and that communication will serve to build mutual trust.
I'm certain that the two presidents will have very good meetings, and I'm very glad to see President Trump going to Beijing. I think that's a good thing for the United States, it's a good thing for China, it's a good thing for the world. I think that's a very important message that both the United States and China keep the doors open, first of all, for dialogue between our leaders, between our presidents, between members of Congress, between businesses, and just between ordinary people. This person-to-person relationship, they're so important to continue to build understanding of one another.
Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam also shared his views on the potential for more trade between the U.S. and China. He said China is a great market with both challenges and opportunities worth exploring.
I've been to China, I guess, 2 or 3 times now, and every time I go, I come away just with a better understanding of the market and what's happening there. And it's obviously a great market. I mean, the facts are the facts, and I think most people that have a product that they want to sell can't help but look at that market and say, is there an opportunity for us to do business there? So I think that's one, it's just good business sense to look at the market that is China. Second, you can't help but be impressed with the growth of the economy and the growth of the GDP over there, and realize that if you want to gain worldwide market share, China is one great opportunity to do that. I would urge him to spend as much time as he can to understand China. It's obviously, when you think about the world situation today, you better have a good grasp of where China is.
Well, China-U.S. trade relations represent a key focus of President Trump's visit to China, and the U.S. states of Wyoming and Alaska are keen to deepen energy trade with China. For more on this, CGTN's Wang Guan spoke with Alaska Governor Bill Walker and Wyoming Governor Matt Mead.
We have been in trade with China on fish, nearly $1 billion a year for our seafood. So we have a long history with China of a trade relationship. So we're looking at now moving that trade relationship from seafood over to our natural resources, the natural gas, liquefied natural gas. When we look at the volume of gas that we would have and LNG we'd have available to ship from Alaska, that's equivalent to 80 million tons per year of CO2 emissions that will not be, it would reduce it by that much. And so it really emphasized and showcased the clean burning nature of our natural gas. So we see we're a good fit in that goal of China.
I've had the privilege of going to China on a couple of trips, and one of the things that struck me about China is just the number of people and the number of opportunities presented for trade with the United States and then with individual states. And when it comes to trade, it's not just trading commodities or services, it's also the opportunity to share good ideas and opportunities as it relates to energy between China and the state of Wyoming. Wyoming is an energy state. We are the #1 coal producer, Wyoming is. Both China and the state of Wyoming have been working, even prior to my term, on looking at how you make coal as efficient as possible and as clean as possible. That includes everything from regional haze, particulates, to CO2.
All right, so we're just waiting for the two presidents to make joint remarks in front of the Great Hall of the People, and that's after a session of closed-door meeting. So while we wait for that, why don't we talk more about the trade relations between the two countries? Mr. Dunham, you know, the U.S. president insisted that the trade deficit must come down in favor of the U.S. ahead of this scheduled visit. How do you think this will develop here?
Well, this is not something where you can just wave a wand and it changes. You can say we are committed to try to make it more balanced, but there are two ways to do it. One is to accept more imports. The governor, as you heard, were trying to suggest liquefied natural gas from the U.S. The second way where it is coming down is manufacturing. As China pivots away from export-driven manufacturing, part of the reason is that China is no longer the lowest price manufacturing country because the standards of living are going up in China. Other countries, Vietnam, Bangladesh, in some cases are becoming less expensive. And so that helps draw down the trade surplus. But I think that the biggest issue eventually is market openings, more American products in the U.S., because you want to do this so that both countries gain, and you don't want to eliminate Chinese exports to the U.S. to balance it. You really want to do it because that will expand American jobs as well as products and competition in China. So I think that's the way, but you can't just wave a wand. You can set policies in place that make it happen, but the global economy is complex, and there are many factors beyond trade treaties.
And these are very different economies, too, to keep in mind.
Yes.
A reminder, these are live pictures coming from inside the Great Hall of the People. President Trump and President Xi have been meeting behind closed doors for the past hour or so after that grand welcome ceremony in front of the Great Hall of the People. They will now be speaking here jointly in front of this large delegation here. The table is set for this big ceremony as well. Keep in mind, President Trump has brought with him more than 24 business leaders from companies as varied as Boeing, Westinghouse, other American firms here to try to sign and ink some different deals with these industries. So as we wait for these remarks here, let me ask you, Mr. Daw, when you look at this trade imbalance between the United States and China, which is large, it is shrinking, but it's still large. Where do you see this going from here? Do you feel like China is really making this a priority to try to shrink this imbalance?
Yeah, China do want to shrink this imbalance, but it's a very difficult task. I think a balanced trade is a wrong goal that the Trump administration set. I think if we go to the U.S. university to ask those mainstream economists how many of them agree with this goal, I think 99% of them don't agree with that. I think the imbalance of trade is not an outcome of China's policy, or maybe it partly related to some policies, but it's not a strategy for Chinese government to pursue this trade surplus over the U.S. It's also not in China's interest. I mean, generally speaking, China is a developing country and also a manufacturing power. While U.S. is the manufacturing part of its economy has already basically go to other countries. So it's very hard for this kind of two countries to achieve a trade balance. Just like this, also related like the product chain. Like if you buy an iPhone in the United States, it's made in China. Yeah, but actually China import the parts from the neighboring countries and the regions like Japan, like Korea, like Taiwan. And so China have this trade deficit with Japan and Korea.
Well, and also a critical point with that too, as the iPhone example, it is made in China, but it's designed in California, and the marketing teams are in California. Some of those higher wage jobs are still in the United States.
The profit, yeah, I think the Apple company got the profit. Actually, China only have very limited profit from that part.
And so we keep on hearing this complaint from some that made in China, too much is made in China. Is that fair though? Because that has also allowed low prices for Americans.
Right. If Donald Trump followed through with his campaign threat to put a 45% tariff on products made in China, prices in Walmart would go up 30%.
Yeah.
I mean, your middle-class people in America would be paying a lot more for products. So that doesn't compute. Now, in terms of the Donald Trump business people he brought, what's interesting to me is I call these old economy people. Yes, they're big companies like Boeing, but they're not the companies of the future, the Apples, the Facebooks. They are the CEOs who met with President Xi Jinping last week when they were in town for the Tsinghua School of Economics and Management Advisory Board meeting. So that I found interesting. The kinds of jobs that Donald Trump is trying to bring to the U.S. on this trip are traditional jobs, aerospace jobs, jobs with DuPont, the Dow chemical companies, as opposed to these new economy jobs. And I think that's probably a mistake in the long run. That's why American economists would say that Donald Trump's direction is not necessarily the right one, but the idea of trying to create more jobs in the U.S. you can't argue with.
Yeah, and we've been told that the two presidents are having a short break after a long meeting this morning, and the meeting this morning actually went a little overtime. It was scheduled, the remarks were scheduled at 10:40, and whether the meeting went overhead was a good sign, we are not sure. But on Wednesday, a multi-billion-dollar deal were being signed between the two countries. How do you look at those trade deals? Will that translate to trade breakthroughs between the two countries?
I think so, and particularly after the deals that we already signed, I think Vice Premier Wang Yang said this is just a warming up. We may see more today, so I very much look forward to it. But of course, I don't think those deals that we are going to see today can balance the trade, because the imbalance is very huge, right? I don't think we can just go through this process. And actually, many deals today we are going to see actually is packed into the 1 day's visit. It can be signed maybe one month early or 1 month later, but for this visit we pack it into wrap it into a pack today, so sign it as a outcome of the visit. It's good, but I think it's helpful. Yeah, but of course, I don't think it can help, can resolve the issue of the trade imbalance. So that will exist for a very long time, I think.
I thought that was an interesting point you brought up too, Rick, about the old economy figures that President Trump brought with him, especially considering that China seems to be focusing a lot on these new economies and on the green energy as one example, solar panels, things like that. So China's clearly trying to break away from this manufacturing past.
Green energy is an excellent example, because that's one where I see China and Germany leading the world. The American government and the Republican Congress are against government assistance to green energy. They are very much controlled by the fossil fuels industry, and it gives China a great opportunity, because the research is so cost intensive that you really do need public-private partnerships. In China, the government is supplying that money. In Germany, it's a high priority. The United States needs to do it, or else the private sector is going to lag behind. Yes, there's innovation. There's a lot of green energy innovation in the U.S., but to make it cost-effective, to make it profitable, you need more input from the government. That is not coming from the Trump administration because of its relentless focus on fossil fuels in its energy department.
And meanwhile, President Xi is making it a clear focus of his administration that the country should invest in green energy.
Yes.
And so talk about that then. Is there any kind of hesitation, though, or fear, considering that China relies so much on fossil fuels, on coal plants? I mean, there's a lot of jobs at stake here as well.
Yeah, I think this is the balance that Chinese government need to think about. I think on the one hand we want a clear air, and on the other hand, jobs.
Yeah.
Right. This is a very tough choice for any government. I think in past 10 years, Chinese government has already decided to pay the price. This is a difficult process. We know that, but we think that through invest into the great green energy, and also by expanding or import LNGs, natural gas, oils is to replace the goals. We think that the priority is the clean air, is fuel efficiency, But at the same time, we try to help those people lag behind. We try to help them, give them new job opportunity, to give them training. I think this is the right, correct way to help those people. You cannot say we just save those job opportunity, then let's live in the polluted air. This is something that unacceptable and inconsistent with the Green China strategy that President Xi is pursuing in his term.
Yeah, and the two presidents will take, the remarks will happen at any moment from now. And with that saying, what would you expect from these remarks after this morning's meeting? What would you be listening out for?
Well, I think we will hear personal comments about the relationship. I also think they will talk about having fruitful dialogue. When you hear diplomatic speak, I don't think you'll hear anything about breakthrough, but I think it will be tonality. Now, it would be big news if they announced some sort of breakthrough, but I think that's later. I think right now it's going to be about the relationship.
So help us understand, too, kind of what's happening behind the scenes, if you can, since you've covered, the White House for so long. This is running a little late. We were expecting them to come out about half an hour ago or so. This happens. This is normal. What do you think is happening right now behind the scenes between these two leaders?
I think the conversations continue. This is very typical of Donald Trump. When he has a leader he likes, he goes over time. He did that with Vladimir Putin also. And the others, he just cuts off. And so it's important if you're trying to analyze Trump to do that. Bill Clinton, when I was covering him, he always went over. You just couldn't stop him from talking. So that you couldn't read anything into it. But with Trump, it really is important. It sends a signal the longer he goes. So the longer we wait here, the better the news is.
So you're looking at the live picture. Some of the senior political officials from both sides are present in the room. Chinese ambassador to Washington, Cui Tiankai, is in the room, and Ms. Liu Yandong, another senior political leader in China, and from the U.S. side, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Jared Kushner is also being there. And during this trip, Trump will be meeting some of the biggest political names, business names here in China. What would you expect come out from that?
Well, I think that his goal is to try to figure out how to. I think the bottom line is create jobs in the U.S. That's what he wants to take home with him. He wants to build the relationship and the global issues. But Donald Trump is in political trouble in the U.S. and I think he really needs to figure out a way to connect directly with his middle-class supporters about jobs, about the economy. So I think that's the take home he wants, not necessarily something on North Korea, although he wants progress, obviously.
But is he going to get that take home that he wants so badly? Do you think he's going to get it here in China?
That's why I think they lowered expectations. I think he will get something that he can call a victory, but let's see. We have to wait to see if we have that surprise that exceeds expectations.
Well, and part of the victory for China is just putting on such a show here, the pageantry as he welcomes the president.
And also besides those specific issues, specific deliverables, I think one thing I personally are waiting to hear is how the two presidents, particularly President Trump, what kind of terminology will he use? How does he view the U.S.-China relations? How does he view China?
Sorry to interrupt, but both presidents, President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump, is entering the conference hall now. I think both. All right, let's listen in.
Mr. President, can we start our expanded meeting now? It is my real pleasure to have this expanded meeting with the Honorable President Trump. Here, let me once again, on behalf of the Chinese government and the Chinese people, extending warm welcome to President Trump on your state visit to China. From yesterday afternoon to the present, We have had in-depth exchange of ideas on China-US relations and important issues of shared interest. We reached many common understandings. We both believe that China-US relations are important to the well-being of our two peoples and bear on peace, stability, and prosperity of the world. For China and the United States, cooperation is the only viable choice, and win-win cooperation can take us to a better future. We agree that China-US relations have made important progress this year. We have agreed to further promote strategic guidance of summit diplomacy for bilateral relations, strengthen interactions at high and all levels, make the most of the 4 high-level dialogue mechanisms, expand interactions and cooperation on economy and trade, mil-to-mil relations, law enforcement, people-to-people exchange, and in other areas, enhance communication and cooperation on the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula, Afghanistan, and other major international and regional issues, and work together to take China-US relations to even greater development. The China-US relationship now stands at a new starting point. China is ready to work with the United States to enhance cooperation and properly manage differences in a spirit of mutual respect and mutual benefit. This way, we will enable our two peoples, the region, and people across the world to benefit more from China-US relations. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. There can be no more important subject than China-U.S. relation. We have between us, and we have to include some other countries which would quickly come in, we have a capacity to solve world problems for many, many years to come. Our meeting last night was absolutely terrific. Our dinner was beyond that. We had a dinner that was going to last quickly 20, 25 minutes because I was traveling and you were so nice and you said, we'll just do a quick dinner, and I think it had to last at least 2 hours, and we enjoyed every minute of it with your beautiful wife and Melania together. Their relationship is a great one, and our relationship has already proven to be a great one. Our meeting this morning in front of your representatives and my representatives was excellent, discussing North Korea, and I do believe there's a solution to that, as you do, discussing trade with the United States, knowing that the United States really has to change its policies because they've gotten so far behind on trade with China and, frankly, with many other countries. And I have great respect for you for that because you're representing China. But it's too bad that past administrations allowed it to get so far out of kilter. But we'll make it fair, and it'll be tremendous for both of us. My feeling toward you is an incredibly warm one. As we said, there's great chemistry. And I think we're going to do tremendous things for both China and for the United States. And it is a very, very great honor to be with you. Thank you very much. The hosting of the military parade this morning was magnificent, and the world was watching. I've already had people calling from all parts of the world. They were all watching. Nothing you can see is so beautiful. So I just want to thank you for the very warm welcome, and I look forward to many years of success and friendship, working together to solve not only our problems, but world problems and problems of great danger and security. I believe we can solve almost all of them, and probably all of them. Thank you very much for having us. Very much appreciated.
And that right there, President Trump and President Xi speaking to each other inside the Great Hall of the People for a historic trip for President Trump visiting Beijing. And a lot to unpack here. President Trump giving a lot of praise to President Xi.
Oh yeah, definitely. He was touting the words like, I feel warm to you, our relationship. We have great chemistry, and he has high praises for the president.
Yeah, so your thoughts on all this? I mean, considering that he used such warm terms, magnificent, great chemistry, everything that she just mentioned.
I think you see the personalities of the two presidents right there. I mean, President Xi Jinping was very disciplined and reserved, positive, but didn't tell us too much. One thing he said that I thought was significant was he mentioned Afghanistan. This is one where Donald Trump has wanted an exit strategy for the United States, and working with China, maybe there's a way to solve Afghanistan, which has been the death knell for empires for the past century. Now, in terms of Donald Trump, I thought it was really, it's very important. He is what he says. There's nothing hidden there. I think what was significant is he has given Xi Jinping what Xi Jinping wanted, which is these are the two most important nations in the world. It's the major partner relationship. He said the United States and China have to solve the problems of the world and can solve almost all of them, if not all of them. I mean, this is Donald Trump. There's no psychoanalyzing to do. You can see he has given China what China wants, which is that respect on the global stage as the other preeminent nation.
On an equal footing, really.
Yes.
And that's, as he said, that's exactly what China wanted. You could see President Xi there had a big smile on his face as he was listening to President Trump.
Yeah, I think from President Xi's remark, I think the point that I get is at the, when he concluded his remark, he said the U.S.-China relations is at the new starting point. I think this is something very interesting for me because as we discussed earlier today, this is a very interesting moment, right, for the U.S. and for China, particularly for China. China entered a new era, right, after the 19th Party Congress. So we can imagine, we need to think about what does that mean, the new starting point. What is the new picture we are going to draw together, U.S. and China, in next 5 years, in next 10 years. So, but on the President Trump's part, I feel I have a mixed feeling about his remarks. He has a very warm, very very warm and he said many good things like there can't be more important relationship, other than U.S.-China, and we can work together to solve many important issues for many years. So this is a kind of strategic thinking, long-term planning, and also he used many good words, beautiful words to President Xi. I think those are very positive part. But at the same time, he mentioned two issues. One is DPRK. That's okay. That's not very new. But on trade part, I think he said we need to change our policy. We need to I forget
make things fair.
Yeah, correct the the situation. The U.S. lag behind China and also many other countries. And this is I respect you. I respect President Xi because you represent China, but. Actually, he implied I represent the United States. I have to do some harsh thing, against China, and to correct this economic relationship. So I feel there is an element of threatening part.
What do you think that implies, though? Are we going to see more tariffs or any other actions in terms of trade?
I don't think he or the Trump administration will go that far. But I think that implies that the administration will take a strong, tough position in the negotiation with China side, and want China side to make more concession to the U.S. part.
And is that your read on it too? Because I thought it was also interesting that President Trump, to not have hard words for China necessarily, he was blaming past U.S. administrations for the United States' bad trade policies.
I agree with you completely, and I have a slightly different perspective on this issue, because I think he was setting the stage for not demanding everything that he asked for in the campaign. I think this was his first step toward sort of compromise, where he wants something so he can say there's progress without going to punitive tariffs, without going to a trade war. I mean, blaming Barack Obama and George Bush indirectly for the trade deficit is domestic politics. I mean, that's everyone in China, all economists know that's not the case. But in terms of policy going forward, he's sending a message, this is important, and yes, you're tough, you're representing your people, but I'm representing my people, so we have to figure out some common ground. I see it as a way that he can sort of back away from the harshest rhetoric of the campaign.
That's very business style talk. It's almost like you were negotiating a deal on a business table. Now, he also talked about the DPRK issue. He says he believes there's a solution. What would that solution seem like? Because he caught on China when he was delivering this big speech in front of National Assembly in Seoul, caught on China and Russia to sever all ties, essentially, with the DPRK. Will that happen?
Well, short of a military solution, which is really unimaginable, the only other solution is talking, is something that would involve negotiations, something that would involve concessions on the part of the Americans and the North Koreans in particular. The Americans, if it's accepting that North Korea is a nuclear state, or Americans saying we want to negotiate an end to the Korean War, an armistice finally.
We're running out of time for a little. We just want to recap the headlines coming out from that joint remarks. Here's a soundbite of that.
从昨天下午到现在
From yesterday afternoon till now, we exchange of views on major issues of common interest and reach a lot of consensus. We believe China-U.S. relations are highly related to people's well-being and also related to the world stability, prosperity, and its future. The win-win cooperation is the only viable choice towards a bright future. Starting from the beginning of this year, we achieved tremendous results in China and U.S. relation development, led by the two states of heads of states. And the high-level exchanges and the four high-level mechanisms for dialogue and cooperation, the law enforcement, the diplomacy and security, the economy, and the people-to-people exchange. And we had more coordination, cooperation in DPRK nuclear issue and other world challenges. Right now, China and the U.S. relations are at the new starting point in the new era. The principle of friendship and strategic exchanges to deliver more benefits to our peoples and also to the people around the world. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. There can be no more important subject than China-U.S. relation. We have between us, and we have to include some other countries which would quickly come in. We have a capacity to solve world problems for many, many years to come. Our meeting last night was absolutely terrific. Our dinner was beyond that. We had a dinner that was going to last quickly 20, 25 minutes because I was traveling and you were so nice and you said, we'll just do a quick dinner, and I think it had to last at least 2 hours, and we enjoyed every minute of it with your beautiful wife and Melania together. Their relationship is a great one, and our relationship has already proven to be a great one. Our meeting this morning in front of your representatives and my representatives was excellent, discussing North Korea, and I do believe there's a solution to that, as you do, discussing trade with the United States, knowing that the United States really has to change its policies because they've gotten so far behind on trade with China and, frankly, with many other countries. And I have great respect for you for that because you're representing China. but it's too bad that past administrations allowed it to get so far out of kilter. But we'll make it fair, and it'll be tremendous for both of us. My feeling toward you is an incredibly warm one. As we said, there's great chemistry, and I think we're going to do tremendous things for both China and for the United States, and it is a very, very great honor to be with you. Thank you very much. The hosting of the military parade this morning was magnificent, and the world was watching. I've already had people calling from all parts of the world. They were all watching. Nothing you can see is so beautiful. So I just want to thank you for the very warm welcome, and I look forward to many years of success and friendship, working together to solve not only our problems, but world problems and problems of great danger and security. I believe we can solve almost all of them, and probably all of them. Thank you very much for having us. Very much appreciated.
All right, that's going to do it for this special edition of Trump's visit to China. And throughout the day, CGTN will bring you more coverage on the events happening here. We'll have a team of reporters covering this from all possible angles. We're also going to have analysis to put things into perspective for you.
Yeah, our next stop will be Global Watch, where we will broadcast live business signings between President Trump and President Xi, as well as joint statements made to the press by both leaders. Again, we will have those live throughout the day right here on CGTN. We also want to take a moment to thank our two guests who've been in studio with us all day today, Professor Rick Dunham and Mr. Dawei. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your insight.
And that does it for us here on the special edition of World Today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.
CGTN shows you more, providing a fresh global voice you can trust.
And a different look at the world you won't find anywhere else.
We offer unparalleled coverage of Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
We present diverse perspectives on news and newsmakers from around the world.
We want to engage our viewers with stories that represent the complete picture.
We want to share with you ideas that matter to us all. The stories, the people, the issues.
A new and balanced perspective.
CGTN. See the difference.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from my room.
I'm members of Mark, what more can you tell us about events happening there?
Politics.
This is a pretty picture. Timing of the event.
Back over to Beijing.
To go after
all about
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference. This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from Beijing, this is Global Watch.
Hello and welcome to Global Watch, a news magazine program giving you insights on major world affairs, broadcasting every day at 12 p.m. Beijing time, 4 a.m. GMT. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing. The U.S. President's visit to China tops today's headlines.